I would ask that items 12 through 18 be placed on consent, if there's no objections to that.
No, I agree. And I just would ask on number 14, if the clerk could get with the fire department and determine why this report is so late. It's reporting 0708, so it's well over a year giving us an update.
So,
Thank you.
so otherwise, we will place those on consent, but we'll actually vote on those items once we have a quorum. I don't believe all the appropriate folks are here yet for item number 1, so why don't we hear item number 2 and 3 together first.
Item 2, communication from the mayor relative to the fire department's modified deployment plan and $39 million budget reduction. Item 3, CAO report relative to modifying the fire department's constant staffing model to reflect actual need at each fire station.
And if we could have the CAO also join us.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, council members. Emil Mack, Chief Deputy Operations Admin.
Chief Deputy Leonard Thompson, Emergency Operations.
What we can do, we won't go over the plan, obviously, because we've covered that pretty extensively, but what we can tell you, since we implemented the modified closure plan as of last week, as anticipated, the one thing that we can immediately tell you is that the stations which have the 2 resources, where the 1 resource was temporarily closed, the workload on the remaining resource obviously has gone up, and it just depends upon the particular station and the workload in that station about to what percentage it has gone up. But we are experiencing what we anticipated, an increased workload on the remaining resource. That would be all that we have to report at this time, other than administrative issues that are just associated with the closure plan, but those are administrative type of issues.
Now, I know there's a motion to delay the cuts in August. Where does that stand now in terms of working with the fire union to have concessions cover the month of August and not have to implement what's been implemented?
We're not actually part of that effort, and we would only be ready to respond to whatever decision is made. So we don't actually participate in that process.
Mr. Chair, that went to ERC, and they discussed it, I believe, Thursday. And it was given to the negotiators to discuss, but it doesn't impact what they've already recommended.
So you're not slowing the implementation in anticipation of that being approved?
The implementation went into effect last week, and it was fully implemented last week. So there is no staged process for us. The plan is fully implemented and operational, and we would wait direction from, obviously, city policymakers if there's to be a change in that, as you discussed.
Does the new modified deployment schedule still conform to the national standards as identified in the National Fire Protection Agency? I think it's 1710.
Yes, it does. Although we reduced our personnel, the amount of personnel on specific companies have not changed.
Okay, and I know the CAO reported that the fire department asked for resource deployment computer software to be able to find ways to improve response time and identify appropriate times and locations of resources to dispatch. Is there still a move to obtain this software, and if so, where do we stand on it?
In that effort, the software definitely makes a good tool for management as we try to determine what are our resources doing out there as far as response times, number of incidents, also when incidents occur in a fire station district at the same time. But the issue that we have is that to move forward with this deployment software, our IT people have talked to a contractor that has the software, and they would require the commitment of a full-time systems person from our staff, of which, as you can imagine, our systems people are stretched pretty thin, and we don't have that capability to assign a dedicated systems person to that project at this time.
Is that a budgetary question, or could you obtain a person like that to help your staff?
It's a budgetary issue that our present staff in our management information and technology section just does not have the staff to commit to a project like this and dedicate an entire systems person.
Do we know roughly what we're talking about
When you
financially?
When you say that?
Yeah, if we had to pay for that to make this happen, what are we talking about in terms of?
You would basically be talking about the salary of a systems analyst, which would probably be approaching $100,000.
And for a full year or a longer or shorter period of time? What are we thinking?
Well, once you get involved in a deployment software project like this, it would be an ongoing person, both for the initial setup as well as the continuation and maintenance as well as extraction of reports.
So this would help us digest a $39 million cut appropriately, but we're not allocating $100,000 to make us capable of digesting that $39 million cut appropriately.
That $100,000 is just for salary. You still have approximately $500,000 for the software and the implementation.
Still sounds like a cost-effective way to go if it would be significantly helpful in helping us with deployment, and we have a deployment that wouldn't ideally be considered adequate. A little more than 1% of the cost of that. Seems like it'd be a logical place for us to look.
We agree. It's just that we weren't, along with the money for the software, also given a systems person, and we understand the city's budget issue, but a systems person that would be able to work on it, and presently our system staff just doesn't have the available people to commit to something like this.
Okay, but if one advocated for the funding for that, you would be able to actually digest it and implement it?
Absolutely.
Find the person and implement it?
Yes.
Okay. Has the fire department done a defined risk assessment before they considered the modifications to the constant staffing model, as mentioned in the CEO's report?
From our analysis, it was the option that produced the least risk to the public, and that is in relation to these are temporary closures that move throughout the city, where any other options would be permanent closures that impact specific areas, and those would be more severe and have greater risk than a rotating closure process.
This process started about 3.5 months ago, where we had our chief officers evaluate exactly what the risk impacts would be, and this is the plan they recommended.
Okay, and so what are the changes we're expecting to see? Just briefly, what do we think the impacts are now that we're starting to see it a little live and it's been implemented for a few days?
Well, as originally identified and we had just talked about, we would see an increase in workload on the remaining company in the 2 company houses. We would also see increase in response times. We would have an effect upon our ability to pre-deploy resources for significant incidents. Also, the available number of resources should we have a major brush fire or other incident. Also, our training is impacted, and that we don't have enough companies to send companies to training on a daily basis. So those are the expected impacts, and which we will be monitoring, and also monitoring in such a way that we can minimize the impact on those specific areas.
Yeah, it's hard looking at the reports to really put them in context, especially by council district. So we've been trying to sort that out. What about the more distant, more remote locations? How will those be impacted? Like station on Mulholland Drive, for instance.
Yeah.
When that's impacted, will that be more dangerous because it's more difficult for assistance from another fire station to cover if it's needed?
The remote stations, and let's use what you referred to up on Mulholland as an example. All 4 stations up on Mulholland are single-engine houses, so they only have one fire company in them, and none of them were affected because we didn't want to take a fire company, which is the only fire company in a station, and that was part of our guiding principles, was that all fire stations would remain open. Going back to Mulholland, all 4 of those are single-engine houses, all 4 are open, and they will continue to provide the same level of service as they are right now.
Okay, those are all my questions. Councilmember Parks, do you have a few?
Let me just ask, you had talked about, was it 3 classes, canceling 2 and hiring 1. What's the expectation of when you would hire that 1 class?
We are going to begin that class in January, and it would graduate approximately May. And out of
January 10?
Excuse me?
January 2010?
Yeah, that's correct. January 2010, graduate in May of 2010. And it'll be approximately a class of 50.
A class of 50?
Yes.
Okay. And then and one of the things that I think we dealt with this before, just on terminology, because it takes off on a totally different tangent when we say closure as opposed to reduction of personnel, because we're not, again, closing any stations. We have a reduction of 87 people throughout the city that are being redeployed. So we'd hope that we can continue on that path of using that terminology so it doesn't get misused in the public, as we're getting letters and stuff, people talking about closing services when in effect they're not being closed. The one thing, and it's maybe an oversight when we went through this on budget and finance, I wasn't aware, because I thought we had approved the software for the deployment, and I wasn't aware there was a person that was needed. Is that something that came about after that approval?
That came up after, as our MIS people talked to the contractor and found out what the staffing needs were of the plan or of the software, and so that came up
But we purchased
after.
the software.
No, we haven't purchased the software.
Did we allocate funds for it?
Yes,
Okay, so
funds
the
were
funds are
allocated.
there.
Right.
But you can't use it until there's a body.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. Let me ask the CAO on their plan for the $39 million savings. Does that make any impact at all on our budget as it relates to funding next year's pension, or is this overtime reduction have any impact at all?
The overtime should not have any impact.
So we'd be paying whatever the full rate is.
Correct.
And then, I would just, and we're going to deal with 2 and 3 together?
Yes.
Okay. What I would recommend is that Budget and Finance is going to deal with these issues in part of the September, I think, 14th report that the CAO and CLA are putting together. But that what I would recommend from this committee that, again, we remind everyone that these are reductions in personnel, not closures, but that we also ask the CAO and the fire department to get together and continue monitoring the deployment of the software and its implementation, and to discuss the need for personnel to cause that to occur. The other thing that I would recommend that we ask the CAO and the LA Fire Department to continue evaluating and monitoring the constant staffing deployment model as we go through this, and that, let's see. And also, I think we asked the fire department, as we move forward, depending on where our budget is, that we asked, we're going to be evaluating well, the first quarter is over almost, but the second quarter as to whether the budget can complement your $39 million plan by finding funds in the budget to not cause you to do the $52 million plan. But we also would need, so we're not caught unexpected, if we're unable to do that, we need the fire department to begin to think about a $52 million plan so that if that's an eventuality, so it's not a last-minute issue. But the key is we will not be able to deal with the $13 million in the first quarter, but we certainly need to be looking at that in the second quarter of the fiscal year.
Yeah, and if I just may make a comment on that, because you brought up the word closure earlier, if we were to go to the $13 million addition,
have closure.
it will be closures.
I mean, but that's the distinction.
Correct.
And that's what we want to make sure that while we're going through $39 million, that we not get it wrapped up into verbiage that causes people anxiety when there's no need of anxiety. If we close and we create anxiety, then we should do it consciously.
Mm-hmm.
Know that. But that's what we'd ask you to be prepared in case in the second quarter we cannot adjust to that there is a plan to move forward, and you bring that plan forward. But again, just in terminology, until we get to that we deal with those reductions in personnel or reassignments or whatever is appropriate that we call them. But the issue of closures just creates anxiety that's not there. Because if I understand it, 100-plus stations are still open every day.
That's correct.
There's about 43 of them that have less people than normally. But yet those 87 are other places
That's correct.
cutting overtime.
That's correct.
Okay. But those are the things I'd recommend for 2 and 3, and that we send it to Budget and Finance so we can address in that reporting for the September 14th committee. They will be coming up with a game plan for the city, and that's what the CAO and CLA has already been directed to do.
And if that's all a motion wrapped into it, I'll second it with one clarification. It sounded like you're asking that as we pass this on to Budget and Finance, we look at expending the $100,000 to make the software
But
go
I think they need to
forward.
get with them because I think that is important. If we're spending, how much is it for the software?
Almost
If
$500,000.
we're spending $500,000, somebody should implement it. So I think they need to get, I just wasn't aware they needed a body, and so we need to get them and the CAO together to figure out that we not have $500,000 sitting on the shelf and not being able to implement it. So that's
Right. Plus, clearly, this is the time, if we're making $39 million in cuts, this is the time to implement that kind of software.
So if we can look at that, I'd appreciate it, so that we can get all that. Because I think we left with the idea that it was going to be implemented. We just didn't know that there was a body.
And we'll both get to follow up on that issue because by the next time Budget and Finance meets, we'll both be on it.
Yeah.
So, we have one speaker from the public, Dr. Clyde Williams, on these issues.
Dr. Clyde Williams, 4115 Barrett Road, El Sereno, Northeast LA, CD 14. We are also we have sections that are in very high hazard zones. The allocation of the fire department units is fairly dependent upon the brush fire. However, there is a brush fire clearance ordinance and a department which tries to do a good job. The brush fire represents, you might say, the least value, but the highest cost, and requires allocation of our scarcer resources so that they can be timely in response to the brush fire. However, brush fire prevention is underfunded, under-resourced, and represents a very large risk to many houses in CD2, CD5, CD14, CD11, which do not comply with their brush fire clearance requirements. And even though inspections supposedly have been done in many areas, it still remains that in CD5, we have found that there's at least 100 or more large facilities which do not have the brush clearance, which means that you have to keep the scarce resources in those areas during the summertime. Next year will even be worse because there will be fewer monetary resources to allocate, and there will still be the same fire risk. So I'd highly recommend that some of the budget go to prevention rather than to suppression. So, thank you.
And this is really more on target for item number 4.
Yeah.
So I'll take that as testimony for that item.
Item number, it's, okay.
Thank you.
One thing, because the public's listening, you might just mention, fire department, you may just mention all the things you do in prevention that is part of your budget and your everyday inspection programs. That just may give a thumbnail so the public's aware that you just don't do enforcement and wait for the fire.
Right, and we can give you some real quick numbers on our brush clearance program. Over 120,000 parcels have been inspected this year, of which 13,000 were issued notices to do further cleanup, and of those, a majority of those have done their compliance work, and that we probably have around 2,000 that are actually being worked on by our contracting unit, and that work is ongoing as we speak. As everyone knows, Los Angeles was the first ones to push forward many brush ordinance that are modeled throughout the nation and even expanding into the world, as far as we're the first major municipality to go to a 200-foot clearance from structures, which we passed several years ago, and which has been very beneficial in some of the major incidents that we have responded to. Also, we were also the ones to get shake roofs toward a more fire-resistive type of shake, which is now widely spread and also copied by other municipalities. So we've been both in the enforcement, we have been both in the building codes that ultimately affect structures in the brush. Obviously, in our fire suppression efforts, one thing that we do there is on any high hazard day where we expect extreme conditions, that we pre-deploy resources into those most hazard-prone areas, such as, Councilman brought it up a little bit earlier, up along Mulholland, up along the north San Fernando Valley, over in the East Los Angeles area, where we anticipate severe brush fire conditions. We pre-deploy resources so that we can immediately get significant resources on these incipient fires and try and do everything possible, obviously, to catch them in the early stages. So we have a multi-prong approach to brush, both in regulations, building codes, and as well as our methodology for brush firefighting tactics. We're modeled around the world. We also, obviously, as you know, we have an extensive air fleet. And we also have an extensive mutual aid system here, which is probably the premier system in the nation as far as interagency coordination throughout the state and especially within the region. So we are probably at the forefront of brush issues and their suppression and limiting the effects of those types of incidents.
Well, I guess, again, this still relates to item number 4. So I'll ask that if there's no more discussion of items 2 and 3, that we note and file number 2 and forward it to the Budget and Finance Committee with the motion as was discussed earlier by Councilmember Parks, and that we receive and file and note and file item number 3. And so now we'll move on to item number 4 and continue this discussion relating to brush clearance requirements for private homeowners.
Good morning. My name is Robert Knight. I'm the captain in charge of the brush clearance unit for the Fire Prevention Bureau of the Fire Department. We were asked by Public Safety Committee to were there any brush clearance requirements that we imposed upon any private homeowners conducting brush clearance on their own properties. At the time, there were no requirements in place. The requirements that we have are for the brush clearance contractors that are currently under contract with the city and in this brush clearance program. But we went back and we looked at those requirements, the training that we provide for those contractors who are in our program, and we did develop a draft form of some checklist of requirements that we could give our private homeowners who are in the zone some safety tips when conducting their brush clearance in their property. Recently, there has been a history that has shown that there are many fires that have been started by homeowners attempting to clear their brush on their own properties. And many times it's been by producing of metal cutting blades on some sort of a motorized piece of equipment that has started these fires. So we've developed some guidelines and some safety tips to help provide homeowners with more insight and more information on how they can do it safely. One of the number one things that we included in this guidelines is that the property owner have some form of a water source available. That would be either a garden hose, a water extinguisher, or even a few buckets of water. So that in the event that something does happen, they are able to at least try to handle it while it's small. They can be able to extinguish a small fire. We are encouraging them to avoid clearing brush during the peak temperatures of the day. That would be between the hours of 11 o'clock and 3 o'clock p.m., 11 o'clock a.m. to 3 o'clock p.m. We find that's the hottest times of the day. It's particularly in flashy fuels or 1 hour fuels, tall grasses and weeds that are dry. If we get a contractor or a person operating a weed whacker or some sort of motorized device, that fuel has been preheated during those times of the day. So if they're working in that area, any slightest bit of a spark could ignite a fire if they're not aware or prepared for it. And also on red flag days, we are encouraging the property owner not to do any brush clearance at all on red flag days. Those are the days where the temperature is very, very hot. The start of a fire can spread very, very rapidly. Conditions are the winds are in excess of 25 miles an hour, and the relative humidity is below 15%, which makes it very, very difficult. And on those days, the fire department deploys additional resources into the areas of the very high fire hazard severity zone in the event that something does happen. We also want to make sure that the homeowner is aware that if they use a motorized equipment, that it should be properly maintained and operated to the manufacturer specifications. Have a spark arrestor on the exhaust. Do not refuel the motorized equipment while it's running. Make sure you're using approved fuel dispensing containers. Be aware of the hot exhaust, so keep it clear of any vegetation or on your body. Do not use any metal cutting blades on the weed whackers or the weed whips. Only use the nylon type. And then obviously also safety equipment, goggles, gloves, helmets, and even dust masks or respirators. Once we get this, and that's pretty much the basics of all we can just give the property owners at this time.
Council members, Craig Fry, Assistant Fire Marshal for the Fire Department. One of the things that we're going to be doing is, what we're trying to do is educate the public The first thing we want to do is really try to get them to go to a licensed contractor to go and clean the property, because we are going to be holding them accountable. They're required to have insurance, or both liability and for their workers. What we're trying to do is eliminate the individual that will go to a Home Depot, pick up an unskilled worker that will go up and raise that threat level. And we're going to do it through an educational component. We're going to send it out during our mass mailing. We're going to put it on to our website. And with the help of our partners in the community, that being the council offices, the neighborhood councils, and the homeowner associations, we're going to get the message out there. We're going to really make it a big effort to get out there and use examples in the past where human intervention has really become an issue for us. And so we're going to try to eliminate it in that manner. We are going to work with the homeowners, as I said, to try to identify the right type of tools in order to clear the brush, and what to do with the brush once it is cleared, because it is an issue. You know, it's one thing just to cut it down, but if you're just going to move it onto your neighbor's property or move it out on the street, that's not solving the issue. We're trying to, like I said, all of our local battalion chiefs will be going to the neighborhood council offices. They will be going to the homeowners associations, doing that component of trying to get that homeowner to do the property. There were some questions that came up a little earlier on the brush clearance. We did 130,000 inspections this year. Most of the people, almost, I would say 90% of the people, have been in the process before. They know the process. They work with it. They have their gardeners or their people that they know how to do it. We'll do a good job. We wrote 13,000 inspections this year, or notices this year, and as you, in the past couple sessions, you've had the homeowners who come in who disputed their homeowners' fees, and we've really done a good job of educating, but we need to do better, and we're going to commit to you to do better to get this type of information out, and we're going to use every portal we can to do that.
And the fact is, people may have been using their gardeners for many years and not done all of these things and just been lucky that they didn't start a fire. So we can't just assume that because they've used the same guy for 5 years and everything's been fine, that it just hasn't been the wrong circumstance and they just haven't had the bad luck of starting a fire.
Yeah, that we agree with you 100%. The big thing is, we are in, I hate to use the term, a perfect storm right now. We're in a drought condition. Our brush has been in that dieback period. We've been very aggressive in trying to eliminate that issue, but you know what? The potential is there. And if we can do everything we can to eliminate it from our side, we're going to do that. And that's our commitment to you.
And just so you know, if it hadn't been communicated to you yet, I think it was on Friday, my office introduced a motion, and so we'll be looking at both, I think, with licensed contractors and homeowners, whether there's some things we actually require rather than just advising. But certainly at a minimum, we would try to put together the best practices and get it out there, as I think you're already in the process of doing.
One of the things I just want to continue on is, prior to the meeting today, we met with some of our partners who live in the high severity fire zone. And we talked about our commitment to it, our commitment to them, and really forming that partnership on how to do this. And following a lead from the police department, much like their senior lead officers, my brush inspectors are taking that lead role out there. A comment came up, well, there's so many homes, how can they do it? You know what? It's the right thing to do. Or if somebody calls and wants that specific information, we're going to go out there and give them that specific information. We hope to do it through our mass information available resources. But if somebody needs an inspector to go out and give them very specific information, you know what? We're going to be out there giving them very specific information to make it work. We heard the doctor say that we are underfunded. You know what? I think every department in the city would love more money, but we're in a financial crisis, and we're going to make it work with what we have.
Appreciate that. Councilmember Parks, any questions or comments?
Two questions. if I calculate this right, it's about 10% notices versus inspections. Is that high, low for the year? Is that normal?
You know what? It seems to be about running the same.
Same.
And with the interesting thing, Councilman, is it seems to be the same people that we end up citing almost every year. That's why we're trying to increase those penalties to speed up that process.
The other thing, has the foreclosure issue impacted you positive or negative, or being able to locate people because they've moved on, or?
It's impacted us in a negative, regard, just because it's harder to find out who the owner is, the banks. There may be multiple banks involved with the property, who's the primary. But what we have been doing is we have been going out clearing the property, and then we're putting the lien on the property itself. So that's how we're taking care of that issue.
And letting the legal process sort it out afterwards.
Yeah,
but it
that's
doesn't
the
really
partnership.
matter from our point of view as long as the brush gets cleared.
That's a partnership with the city attorney we have, yes.
And then one thing that'd be helpful, if you're putting out formal notices, I know almost every office has some form of a newsletter or email system, whatever you can get to us, because I know our field deputies are constantly communicating through their email system. So if you get it to us or any council office, I'm sure they'd be glad to transmit that.
Yeah, we've been trying to work real hard with the council office. I think you see me around the horseshoe trying to get our message out to all your people and stuff. So, yes, we will work with your office, and I appreciate your help and assistance.
Thank you.
And we have a few speakers from the public on this item. First, Patricia Bell Hurst, to be followed by Nikki Miner.
Good morning. Is that hot? You don't need it. Can you hear it, John?
I can.
I can hear
Okay.
fine.
Patricia Bell Hurst, partner with the fire department. Thank you again, Councilmember Parks, for getting the fire department to respond to my letter. I received 13 pages. We will respond to that. All of the fire department's response to my letter of questions stated in March they do a mass mailer. To that issue, we've had a little discussion in the back of the room that they need to have responsible standards for safety, RSS. And maybe Freddie the Flame can be the logo. And those things that were mentioned here have been mentioned previously. They need to know that they need to have safety gear, fire extinguishers, water source, best time of day, et cetera, to do this. And to work in teams of possibly two, because I don't believe that the Getty had two people at the same place with one fire extinguisher. I think that property had this fire because of neglect on their part. The carrot or the stick to make people responsible is, and this would have to be checked with the police, with the legal attorney's office, is that there is a possibility of a chargeback. I heard Zion ask about a chargeback. And that a chargeback can go to the fire department when all these services are expended if negligence is proven. May be difficult at best, but I think that should be on the bottom line, that a chargeback for city services, county services can be done. With the city finances in such a mess, the standard for safety, I will be glad to work with Chris and the different people in the fire department to come up with a couple of ideas. I will work to see that they get on public service with Doug McIntyre and all the other people. This has got to be done sooner than later, and thank you.
Thank you. Nikki Miner, followed by Donald Lowe's, I believe it is. Again, my apologies for mangling any names that might be so.
Good morning. Thank you for your time and for your attention to this very serious problem that we have in the hillsides. Whereas the fire season used to be at certain times of the year, and now it seems to be all year long. We've had various outbursts of brush fires four to six times within the last year and a half. Our fire departments have been very responsive, and it was their efforts that prevented disaster. Our entire community is very concerned now because of cutbacks to the fire department, brush clearance in areas that are beyond the 200-foot limit area to property, and the mandatory water conservation, which applies to hillsides in the same way that it does to the flatlands. These three elements are truly a recipe for disaster, and we trust that with all the ingenuity here in this room, that ways will be developed to put this back to some sort of a level of normalcy, whereas the residents of hillsides, not solely Benedict Canyon, but the rest of them are truly fearful of what will become of the hills with the situation continuing as it is. And, we thank you and look forward to your positive responses.
Thank you very much. Donald Lowe's.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're very conscious of the terrific efforts by the fire department in the brush clearance area. I don't know if you're really aware that this is a tax incident shifting to the homeowners of the hills, and it does create a significant burden for many, many people who are living up there, who lived there for a long time on limited incomes. I don't know how you deal with that, but suddenly we're now faced with a new water conservancy program, which shifts the burden again to the homeowners who can't water their hillsides without maybe exceeding their supply. And I'd just like to have you acknowledge the tension between the water and the fire issue, and the water program that was initiated in 1982, I believe, doesn't really bring to bear the consciousness of the need to protect the hillsides with the water. We hope there'll be some coordination with the water department. We know that Mr. Constable Smith has a matter before the council. We hope that you can get that out before late into the fire season and get those exceptions put together for us. We thank you for your concern about this and thank the fire department for their efforts, but the water department is somebody who's not in the room at the moment, and that's the biggest gorilla that we're looking at. I'm hoping to bring them in to coordinate the two departments and get some efficiency built into this program that way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And it's something that Bill Rosendahl and I have discussed a couple of times in council already since I've been there, and Councilmember Smith, as you've noted, has an item working its way through. So hopefully we can address this and not exacerbate the situation with the water restrictions.
We're aware of that, and thank you very much.
Thank you. And Dr. Clyde Williams spoke on this item previously, but if you'd like to add anything, you have the ability to do that.
Quite a bit. Dr. Clyde Williams, 4115 Barrett Road, El Sereno, Northeast LA. One of the things that happened in Northeast LA was that we started looking at the enforcement of the brush clearance. And we noticed that in Mount Washington, CD1 and CD14, they have not cleared in accordance with the brush clearance requirements. Whereas over in El Sereno, people get violations and they start cleaning, but there seems to be a consistent pattern in CD2 where Verdugo Hills Golf Course has had a perimeter, right, I say within 100 feet of its structures that has not been cleared for many years. Therefore, we're looking at the equitability of enforcement. I recognize that the brush clearance is fairly low priority and people like to have green things around. Why, if there is adequate brush clearance enforcement, do you need to have irrigated land in the hillsides to keep from having a brush fire come into your property? If you have the clearance in accordance with the requirements, there's no problem. It'd be difficult for us to even figure out how you get a fire started, much less move. We're looking at CD2, CD5, and we find a lot of houses up on the ridge line with vegetation straight up to them. I would highly recommend something like graffiti and illegal dumping, that there be a reward offered for violations of the clearance. Outreach, neighborhood councils stand ready to help. There's actually a group in Lincoln Heights called Aztec Rising. They do a lot of clearance. So, thank you.
Thank you. So I guess the appropriate motion is just to receive and file this, verbal report, and we appreciate the work that you're already doing to get the word out to homeowners, and hopefully as the motion moves through, we'll continue to work on that and maximize our abilities to do that.
Thank you.
I think everybody is in place for that we need to discuss item number 1, so why don't we move back to that?
Item 1, motion Garcetti, Corrett, Smith, Parks, directing the police department to report with an update of the effort to reduce the backlog of DNA evidence kits, including funds spent and personnel hired.
Oh, I'm sorry, if I could back up on this. Apparently, Councilmember Parks may have to leave before the conclusion of the meeting, and he would like to have us hear items 5 through 11 on donations. So if we could flip that back and do that first, that would be appreciated.
Items 5 through 11 are various reports from the Board of Police Commissioners relative to donations from the Los Angeles Police Foundation for use by the police department.
Good morning, Anne Marie Sauer with the CLA. As John indicated, items 5 through 11 are donations to the police department from the Police Foundation, and council referred these back to this committee and requested an analysis by our office. We have reviewed the donations and determined that the department has complied with city policies and the technology items meet the city standards. There will be future costs related to items 7, 8, and 9, but due to the significant benefit to be derived from these donations, we are recommending that the donations for all 7 items be accepted.
Thank you. Councilmember Parks, do you have any questions or comments?
Let me just, in general, on those items, and I appreciate the CLA doing this report, although it's taken 2 years to get these back. They were at council, and I would hope, and I'm going to ask Mr. Tiefenk from the Police Commission to come up, because I think it'd be instructive too. One of the things that I think is important on all of these is that we can tell from the reports of the CLA versus what came to us in 2007 is significantly different. We had very little ability to make a decision on what the content was. And the thing that I think is important for us is about 3 principles that we have used for decades, and it's kind of been lost, I think, in this. Number 1 is that it's absolutely essential that these not be delayed, because it puts the department in a bind of what do they do with something that was given to them, and most likely they'll use it well before we accept it if we don't do it in a timely fashion. The other issue that's important is that on all of these that we make a very definitive statement whether they receive the product or they receive the money. If they receive the money to buy something, then they have to follow the city's rules and regulations on going out to bid, using our vendors. If they receive the product, then I think the next thing that's important that we make very clear is the city accepting it for not only the service of it, does it fit within our service criteria, but are we intending to replace it once it breaks down? Because that was always the reason for the acceptance by the city. It goes into the inventory, and then the city's making a commitment that when they call and say, you remember that thing we bought 5 years ago, it broke, then is the city at this point saying they're going to accept it, or if they make a decision to say they're not going to accept it, then that needs to be clear that if it breaks, you got to go back to your donor. And I think those are the key facts for all of us, so that there's no misunderstanding as it relates to what we're doing when we accept this equipment, and whether we're accepting just the service of it, are we accepting the annual fees for licensing, or are we accepting the $600,000 pot to say we will maintain it at a future date, or we will replace it, or we'll upgrade it. And those are the key points. In fact, we have a motion somewhere that we're asking that we clarify, because some of this stuff has fallen through the cracks as it relates to some of these specific points. And so for the clerk, if we can kind of make sure that we cover those on each, but I'd just like to make a couple of comments as we quickly go through, because I got to go to Claims Board at 12:15. But on number 5, I think it is important that when we say in this report that it's donated, that it's clearly identified, and it's unclear to me whether we got the money or got the equipment. And so if we got the equipment, then we need to clearly state that they purchased the equipment and donated it to the department. And then when we say that it fits the city's, if it fits the city's standards, are we willing to replace this equipment once it breaks down, or we lose it, or it's whatever. And I think that's what's key, and that would be something where the CLA is saying, in accepting this, do we put it in our inventory and replace it as any other equipment?
Right, and actually, just to clarify, for all of the 7 donations, it was all the product. None of them were the money. And where we have indicated it does conform to the technology standards, then it means that it would be something that could be repaired unless we've indicated otherwise part of the
But
maintenance.
repaired is different than if we break it and lose it. So if the issue is that if we're saying it fits the standard for repair, are we also saying we'd replace it if lost or broken? And I think we need that clarity so the clerk can put it in the report, and the department will know that they don't have to, on these items, go back and say, could you fix this because we broke or lost 3 of them, or is the city saying they're going to do that if that occurs? So we need that as part of the CLA's recommendations, in addition to whether it fits the service contract.
Hello.
Jim?
I wanted to get some direction. Sorry, June Gibson, CLA. I wanted to get some direction from Councilmember Parks on this particular issue. I think it would be helpful for you to be aware of the Police Foundation's policies with respect to donations. My understanding is that their policies are such that if we were to seek replacement from them, we would have to go through a grant application process. Whether or not they would grant replacement is obviously questionable. The department has deemed that these products are extremely valuable with regard to their ability to perform their work. Whether or not, if the equipment breaks down and the department requests replacement as part of the budget, we view that as part of the normal budgetary process, and for us to evaluate whether or not we want to pay for it through general fund. An example of some of the restrictions that the Police Foundation has with respect to their policies on donations is that on occasion they will pay for maintenance. On other occasions they won't. I think it depends upon the manner in which the manufacturer offers the product and at the point in time that we purchase it. So there really is no standard policy with respect to the donations that are offered by the foundation, and some of the issues I think that you're raising.
What I'm saying is they need to understand our rules too. And our rules are that if we're going to accept it and we say we're going to put it in our inventory and we're going to replace it, that should be made as a point at the time we accept it. It shouldn't be left in abeyance to say we'll accept it and then we'll fight over it later. So the department should know firsthand if it's in the inventory and it fits our service account and we're going to service it. If they break it, lose it, or it becomes dysfunctional, is it part of the inventory that the city will replace? And if it's not, they need to know that and say if it breaks, it's gone.
Okay, so you just want that.
We need that clarity and up
in the
front.
report.
Yeah, in the report, so that we understand their rules, but our rules are pretty defined too, that we'd have to make a decision on whether it's cost effective for us to do some of the things. It's the same thing as getting a grant. Is it worth the grant if you're going to be burdened down with expense that you don't think is appropriate? And that's the whole purpose of the approval cycle, is it's the city to make the decision whether this nice to have or is this a meaningful piece of ongoing equipment, and is the city going to endorse it and keep paying for it? And without that knowledge, then we're up in the air. And that's why I think it's got to be very clearly defined when the process, when we accept it. Is it something we can repair? If it breaks, it's gone. And are we going to stand behind it as a part of our inventory? And do they get to then go back each year in the budget and say, we need 3 more of these because these are in disrepair? I think we have to make that clear early on. Otherwise, we have all this mismatch of rules that often is unclear, and then we get into the budget cycle and people saying, fix this, or repair it or replace it, and we're saying, we never bought it. And I think that's what we're trying to clarify. And that's the whole reason we sent these back in 2007, so there's a clarity as to what the city's responsible for.
Okay. And then insofar as having these items scheduled for consideration in committee, we will have a new chair next month, and our intention is to work closely with the chair.
Yeah, and I think it's important for the police department, for the commission to know that before it comes over, because it's a lot of work for us to go back and figure out how do you intend to use it, what are they going to do with it as it relates to this equipment. It should come with this information so we don't have to guess. And I think that was the reason it was sent back in 2007, is nobody could make heads or tails over what we were accepting or what it was going to be used for.
Right. And I absolutely agree. The information we got was not very specific. And so I think what we can do is work with the executive director to come up with a reporting format to ensure that the information that is approved by the commission is consistent with the information that we would otherwise be presenting to council.
And I think, like I said, the important points historically have been cash or equipment. And if it's not cash, then they get to buy single source. They can do whatever they choose to do, and then they produce it. Then it's up to the city to decide, do we accept it, do we service it, do we replace it? And I think those are the key questions the CLA is going to have to recommend as it relates to these items when they come forward.
And I'll take that as a motion to move these items, but with that additional direction.
Only if I can go through each one.
If you so desire.
Thank you. But like I said, that's on item 5. The issue there is clarify the equipment versus money, and then whether the CLA is also recommending that the city's taking on the replacement of that item in addition to the service. That's part of.
Well, my response to that is, I view it as, since it's now part of the city inventory, I view this as the same as any other item that the city has purchased, and if it is going to be replaced, then the department is going to have to request it as part of the budget, and we would evaluate it on a case-by-case basis.
Then we need to have that in the report.
Yes, sir.
That's all we need. We need to say it's part of the inventory, and it should be replaced through the budget. And then on item 6, this is appropriate. They send it directly to the hotel. There's no problem. Item 7. Now, the GPS system, the key there is it doesn't fit a standard. So are we going to buy a new one if it breaks or gets lost? Because people have a tendency to drive away with GPS systems and can't find them. So that's, again, a recommendation that we need from the CLA. Is this something we replace if lost or broken? Is it in the inventory? Because it says it doesn't fit a standard because it's too new of equipment. So we need the CLA to look at that and say, are we on the hook for this if somebody drives away with it, finds it, throws it in the ocean, or whatever they do when they find GPS systems?
My answer would be the same, sir.
Okay. That's your recommendation. And then the issue there is, and I'm assuming the commission has looked at whether there are issues as it relates to guidelines and using the GPS as it relates to this investigative tool. My assumption is those have been put in place, but it's unclear. And I would think there would need to be some guidelines of who you stick a GPS on and how it's used. And then on the $3,000 standard, as far as the licensing, is that something that is going to come out of the department budget, or how are we going to deal with that annually?
It's being absorbed as part of the department budget, and again, in future years, it'll have to be evaluated as part of the overall.
So the
budget.
issues that we're looking at them to absorb the $3,000 a year.
Yes.
Okay. And then number 8, again, the technology meets the standard of the city, but on the other hand, are we also accepting it? That would be the key factor as part of the inventory.
I'm sorry, which item, which one?
Number 8.
Total.
So there's we can't get an extended warranty on the station, but
Right.
the other equipment, so are we now going to be accepting the station for repair and upgrade as a part of their equipment budget?
Yes, my understanding is that this is the third total station that the department has in its possession, and it's become a critical tool as part of their investigations. Not only does it provide a much more accurate,
Oh, no, there's no doubt it's good. I'm just saying, in accepting it, we'd just like to have some standards there. I don't think anyone questioned that most of this stuff is acceptable. It's just how we accept it into the inventory. But the issue is here we're going to accept $500 a year for the repair and recalibration. The city's going to accept the station as part of its inventory. If it breaks, we're prepared
we are going to repair it.
to replace it down the
Yes,
road.
yes.
Okay. And then on number 9, now this is one that is very expensive.
Is that sum total?
Yeah, $800 and some odd thousand. So again, is it the equipment we're accepting versus money?
Correct, it's the equipment.
Equipment, and then are we going to take responsibility for $600,000 type of equipment at some point if this breaks down or has to be upgraded?
What we are buying is the software. In addition, this is one of the situations where the Police Foundation has agreed to pay for the 3-year software maintenance costs. The Police Department is pursuing other options for external funding at the very minimum, starting fiscal year 2010-11. It certainly is valuable for the department to be able to have a system such as this. This replaces a very, very old training management system, which essentially was homegrown. And this system has a lot more capabilities than the previous one. So the question obviously is, if they can't find funding in the future to maintain the software, then that will have to be considered as part of the budget as well.
See, and this is critical because it's been such a delay. It expires July 2010. So it only gives them a few months to figure that out. Are we going to put that into their budget, that $85,000 a year? Or where does that come from?
I think we're going to have sufficient time between now and when the budget is considered in 2010-11 for us to report back, because the ongoing maintenance of this system is very expensive. So, we'd be happy to report back to Budget and Finance as well as this committee on that.
So you're going to look at this during next year's budget? So it's unknown, the $85,000 at this time?
It's unknown, correct.
Okay. All right.
But they are pursuing other options.
Okay, but if they fail, then it's the general fund that generally
That's correct.
is the fund. So
yes.
we're trying to avoid that.
I know we are, sir.
Okay, so we'll leave that as a pending, but that's why we need to know that up front. And again, the recommendation of the CLA, are we going to adopt this $600,000 piece of software, and are we committed to replace it when it's outdated? Which it has to be one of your recommendations.
Yes, sir, we will include that.
All right. And then number 10, now this one is the only one I had concerns about, the actual equipment, because again, if it's equipment versus money, a couple of key phrases I think are concerned when they use the word intelligence, whether that's real intelligence like ATD intelligence, or are we just talking about gang information that they normally pull together? And that certainly needs clarity, because we've gotten in trouble before about people creating their own intelligence units outside of the ATD guidelines. The other issue on this one would be, is this equipment unique to this unit versus all GED, is it GED? Yeah, GED units. And do we really want if I understand, GED units are mostly P2s. Do we want them out doing dynamic entries, searches, and conducting covert operations? I think there's a whole book called Rampart that identified these are the kind of things that they were doing, ill-trained and unaware of the circumstances that caused the demise of Rampart crash, because they were doing things beyond their capability and their skill level. And so that's one I would ask the department to look at. Do you really want gang units to be doing that? Because historically, dynamic entries and searches were always the purview of Metro and people that spend all their life training to do that. And do you want GED units doing this kind of work with this kind of unique equipment that has normally been put aside for detectives and special units? So that's the only one that I'd ask that maybe we hold and ask for additional information of whether you really want field officers to be doing this and have access, free access to this equipment, as opposed to some supervision of the use of that equipment. And the last one is, again, they pay directly to the vendor, so that's appropriate. That's that one I would ask you to look at, because it just, and they may have rearranged what GED does, but if it's anything the way Crash used to operate, it's the situation that you have pause if they're running around doing dynamic entries and has equipment beyond what other people have in a uniform operation.
If I could respond to the council member. Richard T. Fank, Executive Director of the Police Commission. I totally agree with all the points the council member made, and we'll make sure on our end that those issues that were identified are included in the department's report that comes to the commission. We'll take this item back and get information from the department. Also, just a step back, about 2.5 years ago, the department, I'll say, cleaned up the donation procedures, and I think a lot of the issues that were inherent back in 2007 have been fixed, and you're not seeing those issues today. But we'll take the comments from today and ensure that those are incorporated in any future report, sir.
Thank you. So
Thank you.
I would just recommend we move all of them, except that one, until Mr. T-Fank comes back.
We'll take all your direction as a motion, which I will second. And before you leave, if we could approve the consent calendar items 12 through 18.
I think we just had a number of 14.
Yes. And we have one more item, item number 1, and this will have to be a brief one, because this meeting has about 5 minutes left on the clock when I have to leave, and at that point we have no council members. So if you could give us a brief update, we'd appreciate it.
Good morning, Yvette Sanchez-Owens. I'm the commanding officer of LAPD's Scientific Investigation Division. And I'll give you a little update on our Rape Kit Backlog Project. This past week, we were able to outsource 120 cases. We are down to a total of 3,720 cases remaining to be dealt with. So far this last week, we booked in 22 new kits to the process. We have year-to-date outsourced or dealt with in-house a total of 2,927 cases, which is huge. And that goes to the influx of not only money for outsourcing, but also the increase in staff that we're getting over the last couple of years, and now are coming online with their training.
How many of the new DNA positions have been filled?
We have 26 new positions that we got July 1, and they're in the process of being filled. We got 16 last year. I believe we filled all of them by the end of the fiscal year. And of course, we have one more phase to go through to get to the staffing level we believe will carry us through and not allow for an increase in a backlog ever again. And that will come through in this new upcoming budget year.
So none of the new 26 positions have been filled yet?
No, the process is a long one. It takes usually about 3 months from the time we ask for a certification to the time we interview and get them medically checked and background and all of that. It's about 3 to 4 months.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your report. And we have one speaker. Oh, actually, I guess we need to, even though it's just me, I guess I need to make that motion and approve the report, which I will do. And lastly, thank you. And lastly, we have one speaker who I don't believe is present under public comment, Dr. Clyde Williams. And other than that, we are adjourned.
Always.